The coronavirus pandemic has derailed the Tokyo 2020 Olympics, the biggest sporting event in the world. But COVID-19 isn't the only threat facing global sport. The Olympics has been dogged by scandals over doping, race relations, and the inclusion of intersex and transgender athletes. Edwin Moses is an Olympic hero who dominated the men's 400-metre hurdles for a decade up to his retirement in 1989. He broke the world record on 4 separate occasions. Since then, he's been chair of the US Anti-Doping Agency and is now chair of the Laureus Sport for Good Foundation.
Edwin Moses, welcome to The Economist Asks.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm very glad to be here.
This week, we should have seen the start of the Olympic Games. Instead, we're talking from both of our homes, of course, as it's been postponed. Can you imagine how that feels for an athlete like yourself who put so much into these key moments?
I know exactly how it feels from what happened in the 1980 Olympic Games in Moscow when the United States Olympic team and several other Olympic teams from around the world didn't get to compete. The only difference this time is that, as we know right now, it's only been postponed. So the athletes are hoping that they may be able to compete. But, it's something that really, really guts you.
I see that a member of the Japanese Olympic Organising Committee has said, actually, just before we started recording, that unless coronavirus conditions improved a lot, the Tokyo Games, already postponed, wouldn't be able to go ahead in 2021. And if they don't, what do you think the impact will be on the sporting world?
Even if things were perfect in Tokyo and or China in 2022, I just don't see how you can safely bring that many people together from various points in the world under the conditions that we have now.
And how did you prepare physically and mentally for Olympic races? Take us back, if you could, to the first time, so that's Montreal in 1976. Before that, for many, missing Olympics of the 1980s, because, of course, there was a protest against the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan. But 76, there you are on the starting line, and unknown, I think, at the time, headed for gold. What took you there?
My story is very unusual in that I went to college on an academic scholarship to study physics and engineering. The small college that I went to, Morehouse College, which is the alma mater of Dr. Martin Luther King. I went to school with his son, and some of my classmates, Spike Lee and Samuel Jackson, were there at the time. It was, well, we didn't have any facility. We didn't have a track. We didn't have a field. So I literally was jumping fences all of 1974, 75, and 76. And I had the opportunity to go to and qualifying for those Olympic trials almost exactly 4 months to the day before the Olympics. And I had to pick one of those events. Fortunately, I picked the right event, the toughest one, the 400 hurdles. And 4 months later, I was Olympic champion. So when I got there, I felt like I was a gladiator with a mission, because I should have never been there in the first place. And I knew that I was prepared. I knew that I was going to win a world record. And I did. I'm
just to sort of move us perhaps along to the broader application of sport or meaning for sport for you in the world. And since you left competitive athletics, I know it's the motto of your Laureus Foundation that sport has the power to change the world. And if we look back from John Carlos and Tommy Smith and the famous Black Power salute in 1968 to Peter Connor waving the Irish flag at the beginning of the 20th century, sports have often been used as a platform for protest. Do you think that you have to think very carefully about what you protest about, or do you think really it's up to the conscience of each and every athlete, with a limelight on them if they're at a high level, as you describe, to choose what they do?
I think it's up to the athlete. I talk with Tommy Smith and John Carlos. They both live here in Atlanta. They're both really good friends of mine. And, before they protested in Mexico City, the whole thing is that they've got to go round by round. They've got to get to the final, and then they've got to get on the podium. So I think the protest part of it is not anything that athletes go in thinking, well, I'm going to win a gold medal or a silver, and then I'm going to protest about this. I don't think athletes do that. I think it's something that happens organically.
I used to have this argument for a very long time. My father, who also helped to train me, was very involved with athletics and with the local stadium. And he was very much of a view the more politics was threaded through sport, the more it sort of undermined the sort of purity of the sport, and that you should really leave your views behind you in other than very extreme circumstances. What do you think? Can you ever, or should you ever, take politics out of sport?
In many cases, you have people that say athletes ought to shut up, but only if I don't agree with you. If I agree with you, then it's okay. And so that's one of the big issues with it. But sports people are like any other profession. We have the right to think about and talk about and express what we feel. Same thing as a doctor or lawyer or a teacher. Everyone in most parts of the world, not all parts of the world, but we do have that opportunity to express our rights. And I think that there's no way that at an Olympic Games you're going to contain athletes, especially in the environment that we are in right now, where there's protests on racism, for example, all over the world. There's people that want to protest about having clean water, about disease and what's going to happen to disease, about refugees in certain parts of the world, and war and landmines, and people being gassed in their countries. So there's plenty of reasons that athletes need to be concerned.
Yeah, I was going to give a flavour of that with a sort of broadening out of gestures of solidarity. If we look, for instance, at American basketball, the women's NBA will have Black Lives Matter on their training jerseys. The NBA will have the motto stencilled onto the court for the new season. I'd just like to ask you how much power you feel that these gestures have. I get the impression that you largely support protest movement. You feel that people should protest if they wish to, but how powerful are they in actually bringing about change as opposed to being totemic in some way?
I was looking at Instagram one evening, and there was a 14-year-old girl that was at one of the protests, and she had a sign that said, George Floyd is not a wake-up call. We've had it on snooze for too long, and I think that's true. So over here, people have really been inundated and had a chance to see and experience and see visually and understand, the plight of what's been going on. I had another friend of mine, one of my Jewish high school friends, we're still friends today. She said, not being a racist is not enough. You have to be anti-racist. People have begun to think about it, not only in the United States, but all over America, and be educated about the plight of African-American people and the history of slavery, the history of the Confederacy, and be able to see with their own eyes what police brutality looks like, and see the statistics and see the disparity.
You went to a mainly Black college. You spent your time in athletics, so obviously mixed worlds there racially, but at the time a lot was really not changing in society. We think that society has changed, and yet a lot of your colleagues, I think others who've made protest gestures, have said that it didn't change. I think Tommy Smith and John Carlos actually among this number, that it didn't change as much as they thought. What's your personal experience been?
Well, it definitely has changed. It's changed in waves. There's been significant changes, like the Voting Rights Act, Brown versus the Board of Education. All those things made significant changes, but in the last 20 years, and even in the last 3 to 5 years, a lot of that has been rolled back by the Supreme Court. There's significant changes. A young kid, if I was 20 years old and growing up today, I'd have 300, 400, 500% more opportunities than I would have when I was growing up. I could work for an investment bank. I could be a CEO for a university, a top level accountant. I could be a CEO of a major Fortune 500 company. Those things weren't possible 40 years ago. So there's been a significant change in opportunity that is there to be had. But at the core of it, the insensitivity to what's happening to Native Americans and African American people, and even poor white people. They've been beat up for a long time too, and it has nothing to do with the color of the skin all the time. In many cases, it's straight economics. So it's a class struggle. It's not necessarily all about black and white, and hopefully people don't get that confused. Because when that happens, there's a lot of people over here that are white that actually vote against their best interests, because they get caught up on the racial thing, and they've been taught to hate and taught to not care and have empathy for people who perhaps may not look like them, but have exactly the same issues. The racial issue has been used to divide Americans in many ways that are very insidious and subliminally applied.
A different angle now on what you've been doing, and that's the anti-doping agency, which you have moved on to chair. You made your views clear quite early on, and really from about 1988 onwards, that you felt athletics had moved in the wrong direction and needed a corrective. Since then, we've been to and fro with various doping scandals. As the tests have become more sophisticated, it might seem so have the drugs. What are your pressing concerns now? And who is winning this cat and mouse?
The problem that we are needing to deal with as quickly as possible, that has been going on for the last 6 years, is the problem of Russia. Anti-doping over there in Russia means just don't get caught before you go to a world championships, or we want to detect you at home before you go so that you won't get caught when you leave the country. Their anti-doping programs are really designed to assist athletes to use substances undetected, very unlike in the UK and in the United States.
Is your argument fundamentally that America and largely the West dealt with its doping problem and the Russians didn't?
No, it's all over the world. In fact, when I was running, a lot of our athletes were really good pals and buddies with the Russians and East Germans, and they discussed and compared and talked about what substances they were using, because they actually felt that, well, you're going to do it, so I'm going to do it too. At least, let's take the same drugs and compete and hope that we don't get caught. I just fundamentally disagree with that philosophy, and that's one of the reasons I got in the drug anti-doping business. I think we're winning in lots of countries around the world where the unabated use of some of the most powerful and common drugs can't occur anymore. So they're looking at a whole different way of doing testing. It's much more effective. So we're able to root out core drugs that everyone has been using all the time. Those can be found effectively. But there's other stuff out there, and there always will be.
Something that didn't arise as a debate in your earlier days, but is now very much in the spotlight. The IOC ruled in March it would wait till after the Tokyo Games to rule on how sports organizations would deal with the delicate question of transgender, intersex, and athletes whose biology might be seen as giving them some unfair advantage. What is your view of this?
It's very, very complicated. I was really disappointed initially in the way that Caster Semenya was treated by the International Amateur Athletic Federation. I just thought it was wrong.
So just to clarify for our listeners, Caster Semenya is an athlete who's hyper-androgynous, and the initial ruling against her was she should adjust or reduce her natural testosterone to compete as a woman. Is that the way you'd understand it?
Yeah, but when you use words like androgynous and intersex, there's a wide range of different levels of intersex and hormonal anomalies, I would call it that. But the case really stood on whether or not she was a biological male versus a woman with a lot of testosterone. And so she fell outside of that category from the research that I've seen of being just a woman with a lot of testosterone. And in fact, was a biological male who had lived a life as a woman and through no fault of her own was very, very good in track and field. So it's a case that is quite emotional, for me and everyone else. I guess the question would be, and unfortunately I don't have a daughter, but would you want your daughter to be running against generally a man who's a transgender, but yet still has a biological makeup that is very, very different from most women, way outside of the range. So it's difficult. I don't know what I would have done if I had to make a decision.
It does sound to me like you think that she ought to be competing against male athletes.
She has a distinct advantage over female athletes. She's producing testosterone from some of the charts that I've seen, or some of the cases that are very, very similar to hers that are well into what the average man produces.
You've said that you think the sport has its head in the ground on this issue, and I think you've reflected as you picked your way through it, it's morally complex. It's complex in terms of the sport and indeed definitions. But what would it mean for the sport to take its head off the ground, to face up to it? What would that entail?
I think it was last year or the year before they finally made a decision and decided that these athletes would have to have lower testosterone levels, either by medication or not. Either don't compete or have medication to temper the testosterone. I think that that presents a dilemma as well. But at the same time, we have limits. We have categories for men and women based specifically on sex. So it's not like you're discriminated against anyone. Why don't women compete with men? Because there's a distinct advantage that men have because we produce more testosterone. That is the fundamental position of all sports in this world, that you have to recognize that there is a difference.
And Dr. Moses, given it's 30 years since I saw you, Ron, even if you didn't see me, though I think you're in my little autograph book here, somewhere in this great panoply of names from athletics. That stood the test of 30 years when I've lost everything else. So I was wondering, if you were to take me running in London, I hope you'll take up my challenge. And I think you might just about keep up. But what are your tips for improvement for those of us who have a lot of our listeners who will be very amateur athletes, still kind of daydreaming of gold? And if not gold, but just at least of getting a good deal better. Give us your magic nostrum if you could.
I think a lot of it is not just the physical part, but I think it's mentally, how you position yourself in life and what kind of person you're going to be. I think in a lot of cases, you're not going to be a better athlete. You're not going to be a much more better athlete than the type of person that you are. It's about personal development. And if you're able to develop yourself academically or in your job or just be more receptive to information because you're willing to work hard in sports, I think those are the benefits that everyone can get from sports. It has nothing to do with how fast you are or what level you go. Those are life skills that can go a long, long way.
Dr. Edwin Moses, thank you very much for joining us.
And thank you very much.
This interview is from our show, The Economist Asks, and every week we publish a new episode in which we interview key figures in world events. The link opposite will take you to a page with all of our previous episodes. Thanks for watching.